We hope you are thrilled by these original Sherlock Holmes adventures. To help us continue creating them, please consider supporting our Patreon. As a thank you, patrons receive early access to most stories before they launch on YouTube. Your financial contributions are the lifeblood of this channel. The link to our Patreon is in the description below. It was a raw grey morning in early October, the sort that seemed to leach the colour from the very air, when our quiet breakfast at Baker Street was interrupted by a summons of a most unusual nature. I, Dr. John Watson, had been enjoying the familiar ritual of buttered toast and the day's Gazette, whilst Holmes, across from me, was already lost in the labyrinthine intricacies of a monograph on the analytical chemistry of tobacco ash. A sharp rap on the door, followed by the hurried footsteps of our landlady, Mrs. Hudson, heralded the arrival of a client whose agitation was palpable even before he crossed our threshold. "A gentleman, Mr. Holmes," Mrs. Hudson announced, her voice tinged with a blend of concern and morbid curiosity. "Says his business is of the gravest urgency." Holmes merely nodded, without so much as glancing up from his paper. "Show him in, Mrs. Hudson, and a decanter of sherry, if you please." The figure who entered was a man whose very attire bespoke a station of considerable wealth, yet whose present demeanour was one of utter disarray. His finely tailored suit was rumpled, his cravat askew, and his usually meticulously groomed silver hair seemed to have been raked by a desperate hand. His eyes, set deep within a pallid face, darted about the room with an almost feverish intensity. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he stammered, his voice hoarse with strain. "At your service, Sir Alistair Finch," Holmes replied, finally laying aside his monograph and fixing the man with a gaze that seemed to pierce to the very core of his being. "Pray, compose yourself. Watson, a chair for Sir Alistair." I pushed forward the armchair by the fire, into which the man collapsed with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of an impossible burden. "You know my name?" Sir Alistair managed, his eyes widening. "Your crest on the signet ring you habitually twirl, the faint scent of the distinctive Blackwood blend tobacco, favoured by only a few discerning gentlemen of Kent, combined with a recent newspaper account of certain difficulties surrounding your family estate, the puzzle pieces begin to form a rudimentary picture," Holmes explained, waving a dismissive hand. "Now, Sir Alistair, to the core of your distress. I deduce it is not merely some trifling matter of lost jewels or a disputed will." Sir Alistair wrung his hands. "Trifling? Mr. Holmes, it is a matter that defies all reason, all natural law. My bridge, sir, my ancient solid stone bridge, has vanished." I confess I exchanged a bewildered glance with Holmes, expecting a flicker of amusement, perhaps a sardonic smile. Instead, my friend's eyes had narrowed, his features hardening into that familiar mask of intense concentration. "Vanished, you say?" Holmes murmured, a strange note of intrigued curiosity in his voice. "Be precise, Sir Alistair. Bridges do not, as a rule, simply evaporate. Were there signs of demolition, of collapse?" "None, absolutely none," Sir Alistair exclaimed, pushing himself forward in his chair. "Blackwood Manor, as you may know, stands encircled by a wide, deep moat, fed by the River Medway. For 300 years, the sole access to the main house has been a magnificent stone bridge, 10 yards long, 5 wide, built of Kentish ragstone, solid as a fortress wall. I dined last night, as usual, crossed the bridge to my bedchamber, which overlooks the eastern approach. This morning, at dawn, I awoke, as is my habit, to admire the sunrise over the grounds. And where the bridge should have been, Mr. Holmes, there was simply nothing. An empty expanse of water reflecting the grey sky, as if it had never been there at all. He paused, breathing heavily. My servants, the groundsmen, have searched the moat, the banks, the surrounding woods. Not a single stone, not a splinter of masonry. It is as if some unseen hand lifted it whole from the earth and carried it away into the ether. The drawbridge mechanism, unused for generations, remains rusted and unworkable. We are marooned, Mr. Holmes, utterly marooned, and what is more, I fear for my sanity. Holmes rose, pacing the room with his hands clasped behind his back, his brow furrowed in deep thought. A most singular predicament, Sir Alistair. An impossible one at first blush. Yet the impossible is often merely the improbable, viewed from an unaccustomed angle. Watson, our bags. Blackwood Manor, I apprehend, requires our immediate attention. This, my dear fellow, promised to be a challenge of the first magnitude. Within the hour, with the last vestiges of London's morning mist still clinging to the chimney-pots, we found ourselves ensconced in a hansom cab, rumbling south-east towards the heart of Kent. Sir Alistair, though still visibly shaken, had regained a measure of composure, providing Holmes with a concise history of Blackwood Manor and its inhabitants. The manor itself is old, dating back to the Tudors, though much of it was rebuilt in the Georgian era, Sir Alistair explained. The moat, however, is original, a relic of its defensive past. My family has held it for centuries. Besides myself, my niece Lady Evelyn resides there, a charming if somewhat flighty young woman, and her fiancé, Mr. Cedric Thorne, an aspiring politician of considerable ambition. We also have a guest, Dr. Elias Thorne, Cedric's elder brother, a man of some renown in the field of experimental optics, who has been staying with us for the past fortnight, engaged in some private research in the old observatory tower. Holmes's eyes, which had been idly scanning the passing hedgerows, sharpened perceptibly at the mention of Dr. Elias Thorne. An expert in optics, you say? That is a peculiar coincidence, given the nature of your predicament. Sir Alistair frowned. I fail to see the connection, Mr. Holmes. What has the science of light to do with a vanished stone bridge? Holmes offered a thin smile. Perhaps everything, Sir Alistair, or perhaps nothing. It is merely a scrap of information to be filed away, pending further observation. The journey was punctuated by Holmes's pointed questions concerning the manor's layout, the disposition of its various outbuildings, the routines of the household staff, and the precise weather conditions of the previous night. Sir Alistair recounted a calm, moonless night, with only a light breeze, certainly no storm that could have accounted for such a catastrophic event. As we neared Blackwood Manor, the landscape grew wilder, the trees denser, lending an air of ancient isolation to the estate. The drive, a long, winding avenue of ancient oaks, finally opened onto a vista that brought a gasp from me. Before us stood Blackwood Manor, an imposing structure of dark, weathered stone, its gables and turrets silhouetted against the leaden sky. But it was not the grandeur of the house that seized my attention, but rather the scene immediately before it. The moat, wide and eerily still, reflected the grey heavens like a sheet of polished steel. and where the massive stone bridge, a fixture of the landscape for 3 centuries, should have been, there was indeed nothing. A gaping, impossible void separated us from the manor's imposing oak doors. The far bank, overgrown with ivy and ancient yews, rose directly from the water, without any indication of the broad pathway of stone that should have connected it to the gravel drive on our side. The water was undisturbed, its surface unbroken, save for a few fallen leaves. There were no ripples, no signs of debris, no shattered masonry, no churning mud, nothing to suggest that a structure weighing many tons had recently plunged into its depths. "By Jove, Holmes!" I exclaimed, my voice barely above a whisper. "It is, as you say, impossible." Holmes, however, remained impassive, his eyes sweeping across the scene with an almost frightening intensity. He ignored the frantic gesticulations of a group of servants gathered near the front door, who had clearly been awaiting their master's return with news. Instead, he dismounted from the cab and walked directly to the edge of the moat, his gaze dissecting every detail of the bank, the water, and the distant facade of the manor. "Observe, Watson," he murmured, without taking his eyes from the scene. "Note the clean lines of the water's edge on both banks. No disturbed earth, no fresh marks of displaced stone. The grass on the near bank is flattened in places, suggesting many people have stood here peering into the abyss. But these are recent, superficial indentations. Note also the complete absence of any churned mud or underwater disturbance. For a structure of such immense weight to have simply collapsed, the effects would be catastrophic. The banks would be torn asunder, the water thick with silt, the very bottom of the moat scarred." He knelt, examining a patch of damp earth near the edge. "And no tracks, no heavy cart tracks, no indentations of rollers or winches. To move such a bridge, Watson, would require a small army of engineers and machinery that would leave unmistakable traces. Yet here we stand, confronted by an absence, a void, an engineered nothingness, if you will." Sir Alister joined us, wringing his hands once more. "You see, Mr. Holmes, it is witchcraft, or some malevolent spirit." Holmes merely grunted. "Spirits, Sir Alister, are rarely so tidy in their machinations. This, I assure you, is the work of human ingenuity, however perverse its application. Now, tell me, is there any other means of crossing the moat, however obscure?" "Only a small punt, kept chained to the boathouse at the far end of the eastern bank, for fishing," Sir Alister replied. "It would take us a good 10 minutes to reach it on foot, and it is hardly suitable for anyone save a single individual." "Then we shall utilize the punt, Sir Alister, though I confess it is not my preferred mode of transport for a serious investigation. But first, a word with your household staff." Holmes systematically interviewed the assembled servants, beginning with the head butler, Mr. Ainsworth, a gaunt, meticulous man whose answers were delivered with military precision, yet offered no fresh insights. None had heard a sound during the night, save for the usual creaks and groans of an old house. The groundskeeper, old Thomas, a gnarled individual whose face was as weathered as the manor's stones, offered a single, seemingly insignificant detail. "Well, sir, I did think it a bit queer," old Thomas mumbled, scratching his chin. "When I went out for my morning rounds, just as the sun was thinking of peeping over the eastern woods, I noticed, well, a sort of sparkle like the dew was catching the light in a peculiar way, right where the bridge ought to be. But then it was gone, faded like a dream, and all I saw was the water. Holmes's eyes, which had been half closed in thought, snapped open. "A sparkle, you say? A fleeting glint?" "Aye, sir, just for a second. Thought I was seeing things, you know. Old eyes ain't what they used to be." Holmes nodded slowly, a new light dawning in his eyes. "Thank you, Thomas. Your observation is most valuable." We made our way to the boathouse, a decaying structure half hidden by overgrown willows. The punt, a flat-bottomed boat, was indeed chained securely. Holmes, with surprising agility for a man of his build, unfastened the chain, and with Sir Alister and myself aboard, expertly poled us across the still water to the opposite bank. Once across, Holmes immediately dismissed Sir Alister, instructing him to ensure no one disturbed the area around the bridge's former location, on the drive side. He then began a meticulous examination of the eastern bank, the supposed point of the bridge's disappearance. "This bank, Watson, is solid, formed of ancient earth and the underlying chalk bedrock. No recent excavation. The ivy here is thick, centuries old, undisturbed. If a massive structure were lifted or demolished, there would be telltale signs. Yet there are none. The water is clear, deeper here than it appears, but still clear. I note a peculiar absence of aquatic life near this spot, however, which is somewhat unusual for such a well-established moat. It suggests a very recent and very sudden plunge of something substantial into these depths." He produced a magnifying glass and dropped to his knees, scrutinizing the ground with an intensity that bordered on the fanatical. He crawled along the bank, his nose almost touching the damp earth, pausing every few inches. I watched bewildered as he picked up a minuscule speck of what appeared to be dark metallic dust, examining it with a clinical detachment. "Ah, Watson," he murmured, holding the speck between thumb and forefinger. "Not dust, my dear fellow. Ground glass. Extremely fine, almost microscopic. And here another. And here a scattering of others, barely visible to the naked eye, leading away from the supposed edge of the chasm towards the manor itself." My mind raced. Ground glass? What could ground glass have to do with the missing bridge? I had no answer. Holmes continued his painstaking search, following the almost invisible trail of glass particles towards the house. His gaze drifted upwards, sweeping over the windows of the manor, resting for a moment on the upper story, where a series of tall, narrow windows faced directly onto the moat. "That, Watson," he pointed to a particular window, "must be Dr. Elias Thorne's observatory, or laboratory, as he likely prefers to call it." We proceeded directly to the manor's main entrance, where Sir Alister, having returned to the far bank by means of the punt, now met us, his face etched with a fresh concern. "Mr. Holmes," he began, his voice lowered, "I have just spoken with Lady Evelyn. She informs me that her fiancé, Mr. Thorne, is nowhere to be found. He was expected for breakfast, but has not been seen since last night." Holmes's eyes glinted. "Indeed, that is a development of some interest. And Dr. Elias Thorne?" "He is in his observatory as usual, immersed in his work. He claims to have heard nothing untoward during the night." "Then it is Dr. Elias Thorne whom I wish to speak with first, Sir Alister. And perhaps a thorough search of the manor for Mr. Cedric Thorne would be prudent." Sir Alister led us into the great hall, a cavernous space of dark oak panelling and ancestral portraits. The atmosphere was heavy with an oppressive silence, broken only by the mournful ticking of a grandfather clock. We ascended the grand staircase, its banister exquisitely carved, and made our way along a series of hushed corridors until we reached a heavy oak door at the very top of the highest tower. A faint hum, like the distant drone of an agitated beehive, emanated from within. Sir Alister knocked hesitantly. "Elias, are you there?" The humming ceased, and after a moment the door opened a crack. A pale, intense face, framed by a shock of unruly dark hair, peered out. Dr. Elias Thorne's spectacles were thick, magnifying his already large eyes, which held a disconcerting, almost manic gleam. "Sir Alister," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, "to what do I owe this intrusion? I am on the verge of a critical calculation." "Dr. Thorne, this is Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the consulting detective. He is here about the bridge." Sir Alister gestured vaguely. Dr. Thorne's gaze flickered to Holmes, a flicker of something unreadable. Apprehension, perhaps, or challenge in his magnified eyes. The bridge? A trivial matter. An inexplicable absence, certainly, but hardly within the realm of scientific inquiry. "I am a man of precise measurements, Mr. Holmes, not spectral phenomena." "Indeed, Dr. Thorne," Holmes replied, stepping forward and fixing the scientist with his penetrating gaze. "Yet I am reliably informed that you are a man of considerable expertise in the field of experimental optics. And I have just discovered traces of finely ground glass on the bank of your moat." Dr. Thorne's expression remained unchanged, though I detected a subtle tightening of the muscles around his jaw. "Glass? That is hardly surprising. The manor is old. There are broken panes, discarded bottles in the grounds." "These particles, Dr. Thorne, are not from a broken window. They are of a specific refractive index, consistent with highly polished mirror fragments, perhaps from a large, specially constructed device. And they lead directly towards this tower." Holmes paused, allowing his words to hang in the air. "Would you permit us to enter, Dr. Thorne? My investigation requires a complete understanding of all elements, however seemingly disparate." The scientist hesitated, then, with a curt nod, swung the door open, revealing a room that was a chaotic wonderland of scientific instruments. Telescopes, spectroscopes, lenses of every conceivable size, and intricate arrays of mirrors stood on benches and tripods, all bathed in the cold, precise light filtering through the tall windows. A strong metallic tang, mingled with the faint scent of ozone, permeated the air. Holmes's eyes, however, were not drawn to the impressive array of equipment. They immediately fixed upon a large canvas-draped object standing ominously in one corner, somewhat shielded from direct view. "And what might that be, Dr. Thorne?" Holmes asked, his voice deceptively mild as he walked slowly towards the covered object. Dr. Thorne stiffened. "That is merely some experimental apparatus, Mr. Holmes, of no relevance to your bridge problem." Without another word, Holmes reached out and with a swift, decisive movement yanked the canvas away. Beneath it stood a formidable structure. A series of interlocking panels, each approximately 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide, composed of highly polished glass, set into dark, lightweight metal frames. They were not conventional mirrors, but rather, upon closer inspection, appeared to be some form of half-silvered glass, designed to reflect and transmit light simultaneously. They were arranged in a concertina-like fashion, and a complex system of levers and pulleys operated by a small electric motor was clearly visible. Attached to the panels were several powerful directional floodlights, their lenses still faintly warm to the touch. Reflective surfaces, precisely angled, combined with carefully directed artificial light to camouflage a solid object into its surroundings, or indeed to create the illusion of an empty void, Holmes observed, his voice now devoid of any trace of politeness, sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "A remarkable feat of optical engineering, Dr. Thorne. Truly ingenious. So the bridge, Sir Alistair, never vanished at all. It was merely rendered invisible." Sir Alistair stared, utterly dumbfounded, from the contraption to his nephew, a dawning horror on his face. "Invisible? But how?" "A trick of light and reflection, Sir Alistair," Holmes explained patiently, yet with a chilling undertone. "These half-silvered mirrors, positioned at specific angles from this high vantage point and precisely illuminated, create an optical projection over the physical structure below. To anyone standing on the drive or the far bank, the panels reflect the surrounding garden and the open water, blending the bridge seamlessly into the background. The sparkle, old Thomas observed, would have been a momentary flaw in the illusion at dawn, as the rising sun caught the edge of your projection before you could properly adjust the angles." He turned back to Dr. Thorne, whose face was now a mask of cold, intellectual defiance. "A brilliant concealment, Doctor. But a concealment for what purpose? A man does not spend months constructing such an elaborate device merely to hide a stone bridge for a morning's amusement. You kept this illusion running well into the daylight for a very specific reason. The bridge is hidden because you did not have time to scrub away what was upon it before the household awoke." The word hung heavy in the air, a bell tolling a grim truth. Sir Alistair gasped, leaning heavily against a workbench. "Your brother, Cedric, is missing," Holmes continued, his gaze unblinking. "And yet I see you have his signet ring resting beside your microscope." Holmes pointed a long, accusatory finger at a heavy gold ring lying amidst the clutter. A ring of such bespoke vanity that a man of his pretensions would never willingly remove it. Furthermore, I note a heavy iron wrench currently sitting in your porcelain sink. It has been hastily rinsed, yet it still bears a faint, rust-coloured stain in its deepest grooves. Blood, Doctor. Dr. Thorne remained silent, a muscle twitching violently in his cheek. "Let us reconstruct the tragedy in full," Holmes said, his voice echoing in the stone chamber, painting a picture as vivid as it was horrific. Cedric was the golden child, the ambitious politician destined for greatness, while you, the brilliant older brother, toiled in obscurity, dependent entirely on his charity and Sir Alistair's goodwill. But Cedric's ambitions were built on a foundation of sand. He was deep in gambling debts, was he not? I noted a staggering stack of rather urgent-looking promissory notes upon the silver salver in the entrance hall, all bearing his name and the stamps of unsavoury London creditors. Holmes took a step closer to the trembling scientist. Last night, Cedric's desperation reached its zenith. He came to you. He demanded you hand over the patent rights to your optical discoveries, the work of a lifetime, so that he might sell them to save his own political skin. "He was a parasite!" Elias hissed, his icy composure finally shattering, replaced by a deep, venomous resentment that seemed to pour from his very soul. He contributed absolutely nothing to this world, yet he demanded the fruits of my intellect to pay for his sordid, pathetic mistakes. He told me he would have Sir Alistair evict me, cast me out into the street without a penny, if I did not sign the papers. "And so you met him on the bridge late last night to conclude the matter," Holmes said softly, yet relentlessly. A heated argument ensued under the cover of darkness. Cedric threatened you. You, driven to the brink by years of resentment and the immediate threat of ruin, lashed out. You struck him with that heavy iron wrench. Cedric fell, bleeding profusely upon the ancient ragstone, before tumbling over the low parapet into the dark waters of the moat, which perfectly explains the sudden absence of aquatic life near the surface, as they fled the heavy disturbance of a sinking body. Sir Alistair fell back against the doorframe, a ragged sob escaping his throat as he buried his face in his hands. You rushed back to your tower, panicked but entirely lucid. Holmes pressed on, dissecting the crime with surgical precision. You knew that at first light, the massive bloodstains on the pale stone bridge would condemn you instantly. You needed time to scrub the stone, to erase your crime entirely. But the night was short, and the task too great. So you activated your life's masterwork. You engaged the optical array, making the bridge and the damning evidence upon it vanish into thin air. Holmes gestured to the humming machine. You intended to wait out the day, letting everyone believe in a miracle or a curse, and then clean the bridge tonight under the cover of darkness. Once the blood was gone, you would simply turn off the machine, claiming the bridge's sudden return was as inexplicable as its disappearance. A perfect, impossible mystery to mask a brutal, ordinary murder. Holmes stepped back, surveying the shattered scientist with a cold, analytical eye. The vanity of genius, Dr. Thorne, is often its undoing. You created a masterpiece of light and physics, a marvel of the modern age, only to use it to sweep the darkest of human deeds under an invisible rug. Dr. Elias Thorne sank slowly into his chair, his face utterly devoid of colour, his magnified eyes staring blankly at the floorboards. He offered no further resistance as Sir Alistair, trembling with grief and shock, departed to summon the local constabulary. Later that afternoon, the humming mechanism of mirrors and lights was systematically deactivated and dismantled by the police. As the floodlights died and the half-silvered panels were turned away, the illusion dissolved into the autumn air. The ancient stone bridge, solid and unwavering, shimmered back into existence across the moat. And there, stark against the pale grey stone, near the very centre of the span, was a dark, unmistakable, sprawling stain of drying blood. By evening, the moat had been dragged by solemn men in heavy coats, and the tragic, sodden remains of Cedric Thorne were recovered from the depths. As we rode the train back towards London, the sun finally broke through the heavy October clouds, casting a golden, melancholy light across the Kentish fields. I sat in silence for a long while, still reeling from the elaborate machinations of the case, and finally turned to my friend. "Holmes," I said, shaking my head in disbelief, "it was truly a bewildering affair. The vanishing bridge, the optical trickery, it is a profound testament to your unparalleled genius." Holmes merely gazed out of the carriage window, a dark, melancholic shadow resting upon his sharp features. A mere trifle, Watson. A simple matter of discerning what is seen from what is truly there. The greatest deception is often achieved merely by directing the eye elsewhere. But it brings me no joy, my friend. This case merely reiterates a grim, fundamental truth of our existence, that even the most brilliant, soaring advancements of the human mind are ultimately held hostage by the primitive, destructive nature of the human heart. The shadows may be receding for now, but another mystery awaits. Do not forget to check out our Patreon to hear it before anyone else.